start here, and I'll start with how Jeff has had us start. Um, my name is Virginia Lass. I am here representing the State Historical Society to interview Lola Bell Underwood in Springfield, Missouri at the Greene County Extension Center to talk to her about her experience attending and teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. So we could start off by, could you tell me when and where you were born?
November 9th, 1936, at Marshfield, Webster County.
And something about your family, your siblings, your parents.
Okay. There were 3 girls in the family. Back to my mother and dad's education, my dad went to school at Plank, which was in the northern part of Webster County. When he graduated, he actually wanted to go on and get more education, and he had an opportunity to, but they were farmers, so actually his folks could not really afford to send him on. So he did not go, but he always valued education. My mother went to school at Anderson in Webster County. When her dad passed away in 1929, they had to sell their farm. They bought another one and moved to the Oak Hill district, and there she completed her education. She wanted to be a teacher, and I think that's where I got my aspiration to be.
Right.
But anyway, I think she went 2 years to the 8th grade at Oak Hill. She went 1 year to high school, but at that time they had to provide their own transportation, and if they rode the bus, they had to pay for that. Well, my grandmother, being a single parent, could not afford that, so she did not get to go on either.
Brothers and sisters?
2 sisters. One is 20 months younger than I am, so we were really close.
Yeah.
The other one is 9 years younger than I am.
And what are their names?
Winona Marie. Last name was Graves.
Okay. And
Patsy Jean, Jean, Graves.
okay. So when did you start school and where did you go?
I started when I was either 4 or 5, probably 5, when I started, and I went to Oak Hill Rural School. We lived next door to the school grounds, so getting there was not a problem.
Handy.
Yeah. And a couple of years we boarded the school teacher. The last 2 years that I went there, we boarded the school teacher, which was, we lived in a 4-room house with my grandmother and the rest of us. The teacher had to have a separate room, so that left 3 for the rest of us. But we got by fine. You know, it was really no problem.
And was that just for 1 year?
That was for 2 years.
2 years.
But then after I went on to high school, she still boarded with us for a few years.
Could you describe what the physical appearance of the school was, inside and out, and what it looked like?
Okay. It was set up on a hill. There were high steps going up to the front door with banisters on the side, and I have an experience about that later on.
Okay.
You walked in, there was an entry hall, there was a library on one side, a cloak and lunchroom on the other side, and I might add our library was probably the best one in Webster County Rural Schools. Then you walked in and there was what I felt like was a huge room for the classes. The big stove sat over on the right. It was a big jacketed stove. The blackboard was to the front of that, and the desk, of course, faced that. There were windows on the south side, just a big row of windows. A couple of higher windows on the north side.
How were the desks arranged? Were they individual desks or? bench things or?
They were individual desks, except that they weren't really individual. They were on runners, and the seat of one. Okay. There was a seat and then a desk,
Uh-huh.
and if you would separate those, the desk and then the seat, and
Right.
we have several of those.
Right. And were they bolted to the floor then?
No, they weren't bolted, but they were bolted to the runner.
Yeah, yeah. So the whole row
Mm-hmm.
was bolted together.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. The older children sat sat on the north side under the smaller windows, and the
Okay,
younger ones then were on the south side,
okay.
close to the windows.
How big was the room? Do you have any idea how?
I really have no idea how big it was.
How many students were in there? Do you have any idea of that?
There were in the upper 20s, lower 30s
Mm-hmm.
when I went,
Mm-hmm.
as I recall. A lot of them.
A lot. So the blackboard's in the front,
Mm-hmm.
and then did you use tablets or
One thing you had to have to start school was a big chief
big
tablet.
chief? Okay. Yeah.
Your pencils, crayons,
Mm-hmm.
glue.
Did you keep them in your desk?
Right,
Okay.
in your desk. Of course, there was an inkwell on the desk
Uh-huh.
that the older students got to use.
And did you yearn to use an inkwell?
We enjoyed using it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. How was the stove heated? Was it coal or wood?
It was wood,
Wood.
and the patrons of the district supplied the wood.
Okay. Was that kind of on a volunteer basis they did that?
I'm not really sure
Uh-huh.
if they hired someone to supply that or not.
But the teacher started the fire every.
Mhm.
Was there electricity in there?
There was after 1945. I started the school in 41. So in 45, electricity came through.
In 45, electricity
I
came
think
through,
it was
so that-
45. It was in the mid 40s
Uh-huh.
anyway.
Mm-hmm. Running water.
We had a well there that had been dug. According to the history, it was dug in 1937.
Hmm.
But my husband and I both went to this school, and we both recalled that the older kids would go get water from a neighbor's well and
Oh.
bring it up in buckets
Mm-hmm.
and pour it into a big crock
Mm-hmm.
that had a spigot on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had.
Did everybody have their individual cup?
Uh-huh. Right. I think earlier they probably had all drunk from the same
From the
cup.
same cup.
But as I recall, we had our individual
By the time
cups.
you
And-
came along.
And then later on, they must have gotten the well fixed, because I remember there being a pump there later on.
Mm-hmm. So you could just bring the water in. What about the outside grounds? Did you have any playground equipment?
We had balls and bats. I don't remember any slides. Swings, yes, we had swings. We had jump ropes, lots of balls to play with.
Mm-hmm. How far was, you lived right beside it, so
Right.
you didn't have to walk far. Other students had quite a walk?
My husband walked 2 miles, at least 2 miles, and he and a group of kids walked through the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And then at another place he lived, they walked around the road.
Yeah. And I think you said the building does still exist and it's being,
That
it
buil-
is restored?
No, that building isn't restored. When the school was consolidated, 3 couples bought it. Their intentions were to start a church there, and it had served as a church earlier when our local church had burned. But they bought it. Then it wasn't too long until just one of them owned it, and they turned it into a dwelling. So it's still there, but it's remodeled into a
Nice.
dwelling.
how many students, well, let's see, that's not, you kind of told me how many students you thought. And were there students in every grade, or did that vary? There was somebody in every grade level?
It might vary from year to year,
Mhm.
but I recall there being someone in every grade.
Do you remember who your teachers were?
Oh,
Did you
yes.
have the same teachers the whole time?
And not always. I started out with Ruth Greer, and she had taught a few years before that at Oak Hill. She also was my dad's first grade teacher, so that was pretty special to us. But for some reason, she left midterm, and then Helen Dyke came in, and she was there for 3.5 years. Then next was Doris Dugan, and eventually, in later years after my husband and I married, we rented Miss Doris's house in town from them, and later bought it. The next teacher was Vera Bass. And the next one was Anita Whitehurst, and she spelled it at that point Annette, but later, now she spells it Aneta. So she changed the spelling.
Okay, Anita Whitehurst.
Uh-huh. She had been a shoemate.
Okay. And you finished out school with those?
Uh-huh.
You have 5 teachers in 8 years.
Right. And my sister had Anita, I think, all 8 years of her education.
Okay.
There.
So you just happened to be in a period where there was a lot of turnover.
Right.
And now there was a separate lunchroom and cloakroom area?
It was just to keep your lunch boxes.
Oh, just to keep your lunch
Right.
boxes, okay.
Right,
Yeah.
it wasn't.
And to keep your coats.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Did you learn a lot from listening to the older kids or being one of the older kids? Did you help the younger ones?
Uh-huh. The older ones would always help the younger ones, and that was, to me, that was a real treat.
Oh.
And I did that in high school too. I went down and helped in the second grade room. But the younger ones, you just couldn't help but learn a lot because you heard the lessons repeated.
Mhm.
You know?
Mhm.
So sometimes you were really ahead of your classes. Out of this school came a lot of really good students,
Mhm.
prominent businessmen. And
Now, this school went through the 8th grade, and then where did you go to high school?
Marshfield.
In Marshfield.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, okay. And did most of the students who went to that school go to Marshfield then?
If they went on to high school, they went to Marshfield.
Did most of them go on?
Not all, most of them did, but not all of them. I can remember one girl who really should have gone on, but she was the 9th child of 11. And her parents said since nobody else had gotten to go, she wasn't going to go.
Oh.
And my best friend didn't get to go either,
Oh.
but they really should have,
Mhm.
because they both were really good students.
Mhm. Mhm. What about other activities at the school? The programs or pie social? I'm hearing a lot about pie socials, and tell me about some of those things.
Okay, we had the usual parties, Halloween, Christmas. Christmas we would do a play or several plays, recitations. And I wrote in mine that I still remember what I said.
What did you talk about?
At my first one,
Uh-huh.
the teacher gave you a little recitation that you learned.
Uh-huh.
And mine was, my face is sticky, sticky, my hands are sticky too. Here comes Mama with a wash rag. Oh dear, what will I do? That was first grade.
That was first grade. Great. But you were required to memorize that.
Right. Yeah, we did
yeah.
quite a bit of memorization.
Uh-huh.
And of course, we had Valentine parties, and I can remember making the big Valentine box that we all put our Valentines in, and then
Mhm.
they were distributed at the
Mhm.
party.
Mhm.
Pie suppers. At Oak Hill and at every school I taught, rural school, we had a pie supper. The teacher would decide what plays she wanted to put on the sign, the things, and then we'd memorize them. We had a big rod across the front, and we would string a curtain on that. That would be up by the time of the pie supper. We studied those lines for quite a while and practiced every day
Mhm.
to get them down pat. The community all came. We would have the program first, and then we would do like the prettiest girl contest. She got usually a box of candy or maybe a pretty cake.
Mhm.
Most lovesick couple got a jar of pickles. They had to open them and feed each other. Man with the dirtiest feet or the biggest feet, bar of soap or a pair of socks.
These were, the winners of all this were townspeople.
They were community people.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Not the children.
No, not the children.
Okay.
Well, not necessarily. Maybe the most lovesick couple they might run, but usually it was
High
the
school.
older
Yeah,
ones.
yeah,
Most henpecked husband.
yeah.
And of course, you want to be careful not to run somebody who really was.
Yes.
So
Now, did they vote on these?
they voted on them. It was a penny a vote. And,
Okay.
you know, during that time, a penny was
Yes,
money.
yes.
And it would bring in quite a little bit.
So
Then-
did you have stations for each of these contests to put pennies in jars?
No, you ran them one at a time.
Okay.
And then there might be some children out collecting them and bring them up to the
Mhm.
teacher, and she would write up, you know, erase and write and erase and write.
Fun.
And then after that was the pie auction, which the girls and the ladies had made pies or fixed a box lunch. And then the boys and the men bid on those. Sometimes there would be heated bidding, you know, on a certain girl's box.
Did they know whose pie they were bidding on?
They weren't supposed to, but you know, they had ways of finding out.
Yeah.
And
Now,
Like-
could you see the pies, or were they in
no,
boxes?
they were in boxes and usually decorated. I remember chrysanthemums were always in bloom, so my sister and I always decorated ours with chrysanthemums.
Mhm.
One time, as I said before, my husband and I went to school together a couple of years there, and he bought my box, and a little boy bought my sister's box. So we went out to my dad's car to eat. Well, that was not acceptable to
Oh.
go out by ourselves like that. Daddy marched us in, no uncertain terms. You know, so
No sitting in the car
no
alone.
sitting in the car.
No.
Not at all. But it was always a good time.
So everybody really did a lot to decorate their box, and that's just fun. That's just fun. The usual school parties. What'd you do at Christmas? Just have a.
We had a program, and then Santa always came to visit.
Mm-hmm.
My husband and I were talking about, I'm not sure if we drew names in the earlier years
Mhm.
because money was tight.
Yeah.
And most families had enough to do to take care of their own
Right.
at home.
Right.
But I know we got candy, usually hard candy,
Uh-huh.
and don't remember too much else about it. The boys always went to get the tree. The older boys would go cut down a tree. And they
So you'd
bring
have a
in.
tree in that room also,
Uh-huh,
Christmas,
right,
with all those kids.
right. And we managed.
Well, if you house the teacher.
The decorations, of course, were homemade.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay. So Halloween, Christmas, any springtime?
Valentine,
Oh yes, Valentine's Day. You make your own Valentines?
generally, or you bought them in the box that had a whole bunch of them in. It didn't
Mhm.
cost too much.
Mm-hmm. end of school party?
Yes, we always had a picnic the last day of school, and that's when we got our grade cards, diploma, if you were an 8th grader, your reading certificate, and I have a copy of that somewhere. Did I say grade cards?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other awards you got, like for attendance, anything like that? Good citizenship.
Was there an exam at the 8th grade that you had to pass?
Yes,
Was it a state exam?
it was. Every 8th grader had to pass it, and we went into the courthouse at Marshfield to take it.
Oh, ooh, that must have been a little intimidating.
It was.
Yes.
But I was really fortunate. Anita was, I say, one of the best teachers in Webster County, and she really pushed us to do our best.
You think she was the best teacher you had?
I think she might have been. I really admired Miss Doris and Miss Helen. Of course, Miss Helen was one of my first ones, and you always love your younger teachers.
Right. I'm still amazed at how anybody manages to do all that. And to pass a standardized test. Did any of your students, or any of those students in your class not pass that?
No, I think they all passed it.
Oh, good. Well, then you did have
I think
really
they ever
good
did.
teachers.
Everyone did.
Yeah. What about recess? What did you do at recess?
Well, if it was pretty, we played outside. And jump rope, boys would set up a marble ring, and inside also they played marbles. Work up softball, where you worked up your bases. Wintertime, I remember sledding down the hill. There was a slope coming up. I think on a shovel, or just about anything else. I don't recall anybody ever having a real sled. But whatever you could get to slide down. We'd go in just wet as could be and stand around the stove and get dry. Inside recess, clap in, clap out was a favorite. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I
Okay,
haven't.
the girls or boys, whichever one, would sit at the desk, and the other would go in this lunchroom. So whoever was in charge of it would ask you to name a boy name. So they would call that person out, and he would sit down beside whoever. And if they sat by the right person, they got a clap, and they had to sit there.
I see. They had to sit beside the person who called their name, or
Right.
who named them.
Right.
So, okay, that has all kinds of possibilities, doesn't it?
Right. Oh, we did the button on the string. We did the variations of cat's cradle. Outside we did dodgeball, crack the whip, tag. A story about a tag game. This older girl was it, and I think she was probably 8th grade, and this boy was in 6th grade, and he ran up on the wood pile, and he said, "If you come up here, I'm going to hit you with this stick of wood." Well, she came up there, and he did. And that was the worst spanking I have ever seen delivered to any child. The teacher was a fiery redhead. She sent the big boys after switches. She bent him over the desk, and she would break a switch and throw it over her shoulder.
Wow.
A lot of us did not like
Wow.
that at all. So maybe that's why I didn't spank very much.
But she used switches, and
Yeah. And it was
what grade were you in? Do you remember what grade you were in about?
6th.
You were in
I was in the same grade with this boy that got spanked.
Okay. Old enough for a good dose of righteous indignation.
Yeah.
But those first graders must have been frightened.
Oh, they must have been horrified. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
She didn't teach next year.
Oh.
In fact, I think she retired. I think she quit teaching.
Did the students have chores in the school? Did you have to clean the blackboards or do things like that?
Mhm.
How did that work?
Usually they volunteered, I think. It was a privilege to get to do the blackboards, dust the erasers. I don't recall ever sweeping the schoolhouse floor, but we probably did.
Uh-huh.
We swept out the toilets. No.
Oh, that's one thing we haven't talked about, the toilets. Did you have, was it an outhouse or?
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Were there separate boys and girls?
Right, on separate sides of the playground.
Okay.
And then they always kept a good supply of lime in a container, so make it a little more pleasant.
Yeah.
I think maybe we had Sears and Roebuck catalogs. I don't remember toilet paper then.
Yeah.
Now, later when I taught, we did have.
Right.
But
Right. Oh. Did you, and did the boys carry in the wood and do that sort of thing?
they kept the wood supplied.
Was that a boy's job to do that? Or did girls do it too?
I think the girls helped some too.
Okay. Did you take your lunch or did you skip home for lunch?
I don't remember ever going home for lunch. We would have missed out on too much fun.
Right.
So we always took our lunch.
Yeah.
And once in a while, the teacher might bring some beans and, and people might supply stuff for soup. Don't remember that happening too often.
What did you usually take for lunch?
Whatever was handy.
What?
Just whatever you had, whether it was eggs or, I remember one time I took, when we butchered hogs, my grandmother did not waste anything. So she made what we called souse. Well, it was good if it was cold, but you let it get hot, it was not good. And I had set my lunch beside the stove. It got hot. Not good.
Not good.
But just whatever you had, you took.
I thought of something else I was going to ask you about that. Now I've kind of lost what it was. How long did you have at lunch?
I'm not sure if it was. I think maybe an hour. Because
kind of a long lunch hour.
We ate.
Yeah.
And then we played.
Yeah.
We had a morning recess also, afternoon recess.
And an afternoon recess. What time did you start in the morning?
9 o'clock. And then I think we got out at 4.
So with an hour at lunch and 2 significant recesses.
Probably 15 minutes at recess.
Yeah. And when did you start school in the, I hate to say fall or summer?
Well, it was almost summer because it was early to mid-August when we would start.
And then you got out in March?
Some schools were 8 months, and I don't recall if ours was 8 months at that time or not, but the ones I taught in were 9-month schools.
Yeah.
So we would get out like in April.
Do you keep in contact with any of those people you went to the one-room schoolhouse?
Oh, yes.
Do you? Do they
Uh,
still live in the same?
Some do, and some have left and come back. My sister and her husband had lived in Oklahoma, and they bought my mother's place after she passed away. So they live right next door to that school. Her best friend still lives around here, and a lot of them still do. Of course, a lot of them moved away. Some have passed away. Several have passed away.
And I take it you feel you got a good education.
Very good. Yes.
How do you think going to a one-room schoolhouse influenced you? Do you think it made a difference in how you look at things or what you decided to do?
It probably does. The two teachers I mentioned, Doris and Anita, were really influential on me because when I started teaching, I based my teaching pretty well on their philosophy. I think the kids were taught respect of the teacher. If the teacher told you something, that's what you did. And if you went home and had been in trouble, especially if you got a spot at school, you got another one at home. I remember one incident, my sister and her girlfriend were out by the pump, and Miss Anita called them in, and they made some smart alecky remark back to her, and she heard it, so she slapped them. Well, they went home and told their version of the story, and my mother and the other girl's mother were wise enough to say, okay, there's something more to this story. So they didn't go jump on the teacher, but too often nowadays that happens. You know, if a child gets in trouble at school, it's not the child's fault, it's the teacher's.
And that just wasn't the case then?
That wasn't the case at all. I remember one of my mothers at 88 saying, if you tell my daughter something and I tell her something else, she says what you said is right.
That's good. Gosh, do you have any particular stories that you remember about that experience as a student?
I was going to tell you about the high entrance way. It was really, really windy one day, and this little girl took hold of the door, and it swung her off, and swung her, well, about 3 feet down. I remember how her head bled, and you know how scared we all were.
So there were the steps coming up, but then it was just a drop off on each side?
But they had rails, but I don't know, somehow she got flipped under those. Anyway, she was okay, but it sure scared us.
Right, I bet it did. Any mischief going on in that school?
Oh, I'm sure there was. There always was. Especially with some of the older boys. We had a couple of boys that had come in from town schools. Of course, they knew a lot. So anyway, that was, I'm sure they gave the teacher a lot of headache.
Well, let's talk a little bit about you becoming a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse then. How did you get into that? How did you make that move?
I think I always wanted to be a teacher from the time I was little. And my dad always said teachers are born, not made. But be that as it may, I just always wanted to teach little ones. And so after I graduated from high school, I did get a scholarship, went to SMS, and would you believe my scholarship was $75, and that paid tuition for the year. My mom always said I started on a shoestring, which I did, hope and a prayer. My grandmother gave me a little bit of money, and I worked the summer before. I lived in a house with 5 other girls, with a lady named Mrs. Lindsay, the sweetest lady.
In Springfield?
In Springfield, at 1020 East Harrison.
Okay.
And she rented our rooms with cooking privilege in the basement for $3.50 a week. And I worked at Roper's Dry Goods in Marshfield on Saturdays for $3.50 a day. So that took care of that.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy going, but I went that full year and the summer, had 40 hours of credits, and got hired at 88, which is out east of Marshfield.
88.
And I don't know how it got its name. I thought the other day maybe it was because of the railroad tracks that ran by. I had no idea, but anyway, it was close to the railroad tracks.
Was it called School 88 or
No,
just 88?
Don't remember the district number, but it was.
Now, did you apply for this job?
Right, I did.
And you had enough credits that they would hire you. So when you started there, were you able to live at home?
Yes. I lived at home, drove my dad's car, and I remember that first year I bought a sewing machine, and what was it? That was the car, 46 Dodge, I think, car to drive.
And he let you drive his car to work every day?
He had a truck,
And he had a truck.
and Mama stayed at home.
Yeah, yeah.
So
What did your father do? Tell me again.
he was, well, at one point he ran a business that made balls. At that point, he had his own truck and just did for other people.
So he could let you have the family car to go to.
Right.
Well, that was pretty
beneficial.
nice. Yes, yes. And how long a drive was it then from?
It was probably 6 miles, 6 or 7 miles.
How was that in the wintertime?
Not good. Not very often, though, did we cancel school. Once in a while we would.
Now, were the children still mostly walking to school?
Right. Or parents would take them if necessary. I don't recall having anybody that subbed for me here at 88. I did at Greenwood.
So how long were you at 88?
2 years.
2 years. And then what happened?
Then I went, during that time I got married. At the second year that I was teaching there. The fellow I told you about that we went to school together, he and his family moved back to Iowa, and his sister and I stayed in contact. So it was our senior year, she had moved down here, and he came down to visit, and he said, I know somebody you can't get a date with, but he did. So anyway, we got married in 56. One of the girls, let's see which one. This one became a teacher, and every once in a while when I meet her, she says she still remembers the thrill of going to our wedding. But anyway,
now, would they have allowed you to continue teaching after you were married?
Right.
They would have.
Then they would.
Okay, those days are over.
Right. Now, even back at Oak Hill, Anita got married during the time she was teaching there. So those days were over.
Okay, that's good. So you got married, then did you continue teaching?
I went to Greenwood at that point. Someplace I have some Greenwood stuff. I have some pictures. This was written by one of the other fellows in the neighborhood that also went to Greenwood, and I thought that would make a neat thing to put in the history.
Yes, that should go in your file with your. Oh gosh, you got lots of really nice documents, pictures.
This was a reunion we had, and they listed all of the teachers for Greenwood.
From 1914 to 1965.
Right.
Wow.
And these were the teachers in attendance.
Oh my.
And I'm not sure what year that was. I think maybe 63. No,
Well, they've got 64, 65 listed teachers
So
from 1960. It must have been 1965.
It might. I'm not sure what the date was on that one. Then here's one of my groups.
And what's the grades 1 through 8? Wow.
This fella got killed later on in a domestic situation. She got off scot-free. And I wrote in my thing, the Ray family, which this was one of the Rays, they had a little, and this one, they had a little boy who he just walked like an old man. And he would want to come to school, so when he got tired, his sisters and I would fix him a pallet near the stove. Well, he passed away with brain tumor.
Oh my. The year he was in your class?
The summer after.
Oh my. Now, where was Greenwood?
It's north of the Northview exit, about a mile and a half.
Okay. Is that building still?
Yes, and when it was consolidated in 1965, the community bought it. There were 3 couples who were trustees of it, including my husband and I. We meet now as a community club. They had a really strong PTA, so we just kind of took those members and we became a community club. So we're working on, like I said, putting the door in and getting new windows. We want to take up the floor covering and go back to the original floor that I have swept so many times with the stuff you sprinkle over it, and do some other keep up work on it. But it's been well kept up over the years.
How many years did you teach there?
2.
2.
And then the farm that on which we live, this school property comes off of that.
I see. I see. And did you teach more after Greenwood?
Excuse me. Yes, after Greenwood, I retired. I retired first time.
Ready? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. How did you organize your day when you were the teacher in these one-room schoolhouses?
We started out with the pledge, and at that point we could have prayer in school. We would sing some songs. We had this, I think every school had the yellow songbook, and it had a lot of favorites in it. We would sing from that. One family brought in some hymn books, and all the kids liked to sing hymns. So with money from one of the pie suckers, we bought a piano, and I know how to play enough to get by. So we like to sing hymns. So then I would assign lessons to the older students. While they were working, I'd move down with the little ones, and we'd work on ABCs or whatever we were working on. Then just move up through the period to the older kids' classes.
But you'd get those older ones started first on something.
Right.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, if one of the older ones got their lessons finished, they would go down and do something with the younger
With the younger ones. And that was just the expected thing that they were to do.
Well, not necessarily. A lot of them wanted to do it.
And you mentioned at the beginning that you had a library in the back. Do you feel like you had a pretty good library in there for students?
At Oak Hill, we had a really good library. Now, I don't recall 88 having such a good library. Greenwood's was pretty good. When I taught at another school named Jameson, it wasn't too bad.
Well, and then I also kind of cut you off from Greenwood, and you retired, but...
Okay, I retired from Greenwood because my husband had gone overseas.
Oh.
And that was one of the times I had to hire a substitute when he was leaving. I drew out my retirement money because if you didn't draw it out within a certain length of time, you just lost it at that point. So I worked that summer and went overseas to him. But before I went overseas, Elkland, which was actually a part of Marshfield, needed a first and second grade teacher. And it was like on Saturday, and school was going to start on Monday. And so anyway, I was hired.
That's Elkland?
they had 4 rooms, grades 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8. I taught there until December. I only had a 3-month contract because they knew from the first I was going to be leaving in December.
What year was this?
This was 1959.
So you taught the fall semester in effect.
Right, and somebody else came in.
Uh-huh.
So then I went overseas to him
Where were you?
in Germany, at Fürth near Nuremberg.
Uh-huh. Oh, in 59.
Became pregnant over there, that was our intentions.
Uh-huh.
Came back, and Northview needed a teacher in the lower room because the teacher had left midterm. So I took that, finished out that year.
Was this the next year?
This was 61, 62.
Uh-huh.
Then Jameson, which was a grades 1 through 8 school, needed a teacher. So I took that for 1 year.
After this year?
After Northview. And during that time, I found out I was pregnant with our second son and decided, okay, I'm going to retire again because with 2 children, I don't think I can and want to teach anymore. But I did decide to go ahead and get my rest of my degree because I hadn't finished my bachelor's. So I got the bachelor's in August before the second son was born in December.
That would have been in December 63?
That's,
Yeah.
So in the meantime, there was another son born. I did go back to subbing some, but it just got to the point I could not do it.
Yeah.
So after two more children, we
Okay, I need to get your children down in the names here.
okay. Lyle was the first one. Kim,
K-I-M?
K-I-M, Laverne. He does not like that name. Lynn David. Stephen Lee.
P-H?
No, B-E-N. And Paula Marie.
Paula?
Marie, M-A-R-I-E. So let's see, the time.
So with 5 children, you were a little bit busy.
I was just a little bit busy.
Yeah.
When I taught at Jameson, there was a lady that had 2 children in school, and she was constantly on the road with those kids. And I said, I will never, ever do that. Well, with 5 children, I did.
Yeah, you did.
I was also a JFA leader, a Junior Farmers of America leader, and of course that kept them busy. And they were in T-ball and odds and ends, girls, brownies. So
You taught in a huge variety of schools here. Were there differences in them? Different ways that they did things or expected you to do, or
pretty much the same, I think. My methods didn't vary a whole lot. Of course,
where did you get your methods?
Where? From Miss Doris and Miss Anita.
Okay.
That's where I got them. And also, you took methods classes in college,
right.
which you got, but your
Which are sometimes helpful and sometimes not so.
right. But your practical down to earth was just from watching these two good teachers. At Jameson, it had been a 2-room school, but population had dwindled until it was just one room.
Mhm.
But that second room, the board hired a lady to cook lunches. So we did have a hot lunch program there.
Now, I've got to get straight where these are. Greenwood, we know. Elkland,
It's on 38 going north.
north of Springfield?
No, north of Marshfield.
No, north of Marshfield,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
And
Okay.
it's a small town.
Yeah.
It's probably on the
Yeah.
map. Northview probably isn't on the map anymore. It's directly south of the Northview overpass off of 44. That building burned, and there's now apartments there. At one time, they had a high school. And Elkland also had a high school that they had consolidated.
Mhm.
Jameson was, it's northwest of Marshfield on Highway W, just off Highway W. That building is no longer there.
Mhm. What was the hardest or easiest thing about teaching in a one-room school?
Hardest for me, I think, probably was discipline. That's always been,
Yeah.
And generally, I hardly ever had to spank. I can think of one little girl at Greenwood that talking did no good. Nothing did any good. I don't think spanking did any good either.
Uh-huh.
But generally, it was just lose a recess, and I might have them write something,
Mhm.
And like I said earlier, I've given SWATs,
Mhm.
but you don't do that anymore.
No. No.
When I quit teaching, you could not do that.
Right.
And you don't dare. I reached the point that the kids like to sit on my lap because I taught first grade, and I'm a hugger, and I like that. But where do I put my hands?
Mhm.
I don't want to do anything that's going to
Right.
be misconstrued.
Right.
So.
Right. What was the most fun about teaching in a one-room school?
The kids, having all grades, and you could get out and play with them, and I did. Played with them. They were a lot of fun.
And you were definitely with them every minute of the day.
You were.
So you were on the playground when they were playing and playing with them.
Right.
What was your favorite subject to teach?
Probably reading. I love to read myself.
Mhm.
I always thought if they can learn to read, they'll be okay.
Right.
They can get the rest of it.
I think I've probably asked you generally most of these questions that are on the list, but is there anything else you'd like to say or tell about your experience in one-room schools?
I don't think of anything else. Like I said, I spent 2 or 3 days on
Yes,
writing
I think that's
something we
wonderful.
When the school nurse would come, and I remember, I just looked up some stuff about her before I came. Her name was Eleanor, what's her last name? Elnore. Shouldn't forget that. I cannot think of her last name. But anyway, she would come visit and inspect us and, give shots and odds and ends. And I noticed something I was reading about her before I came. She said sometimes she'd have to run them down to give them shots. I don't recall that, but she may have. And the superintendent coming to visit. We had a superintendent named Oscar Carter when I was in grade school. And he was a jovial guy. I loved to see him come in. I don't know how the teacher thought about it, but he had this little dog that sat on a little stand, and it was rigged so that he could push the bottom of it, and he'd make that little dog just flop all over.
Yeah.
I loved that.
Yes.
I remember that. Then my superintendent was Ellis Jackson. He was not quite as jovial, but he was nice. I always got along well with him. They would just pop in anytime, and you just always hope the kids would behave while he was there. Let's see if there's anything else in here that I do remember when I taught at 88. They loved baseball, and we listened to the World Series. We took time out to hear the World Series.
Yeah.
Let's see, I don't think I told you, I did finish my master's.
No, you didn't tell me that.
I finished it in 1982. 81. I believe it's 81.
Oh, you were persistent, huh?
Well, it took me 9 years to get my bachelor's, from the time I started.
And then you had all these kids.
So I got it.
Yeah.
And then after I had gone back to teaching at Marshfield, and my dad said, "Why don't you get your master's?" Well, this was going to be a little hard, but anyway, I did. In fact, I was only subbing, I think, that year. But anyway, that year I signed up for classes at night. I had taken on a job of tutoring a 6th grade boy after school 2 nights a week. Then I got called to sub for this teacher. 2 weeks into the term, she got very sick. Come to find out she had cancer. But I finished out that whole year for her. But anyway, with my daughter and I would leave school, go by our little store, pick up something to snack on, go tutor this little boy. I would run back home, drop her off, grab a snack, go to school at Drury.
How many children did you have? You had all 5 of them.
I had all 5 of them then.
Were they all still at home?
So my husband would cook supper, and we had a chart for chores, and each child had a chore that they were responsible for, a housekeeping chore. Every week that would rotate. So that's how we got through that year. So when I graduated, I said, all of them should go across the stage with me. Without them, I couldn't have done it.
Right.
But
Right.
I think.
And your master's was in education?
It was. Then after I got hired full-time at Marshfield,
And that was after you had your master's?
Yeah. So then I did some work on a specialist from MU, but it came to the point I was going to have to spend 2 summers up there, and I could not do that. So.
Yeah. And how long did you teach at Marshfield then?
19 years.
19 years. So that starting at a one-room schoolhouse put you right into education, huh? That's really wonderful.
One thing I might mention, duplicating machines were not like they are now. If you know what the duplicator was?
I do.
Okay, the little box?
Yes.
That had that stuff. So you didn't run very much.
Yeah.
I volunteer now on Wednesdays and run spelling papers for 1st graders. Go through reams of paper, but that machine just clicks them right out, It's totally different.
Yeah. Maybe you should explain how the duplicator worked.
Okay. It was a rectangular square with a jellied substance in the bottom. You had an indelible pencil and you wrote off whatever you were going to copy with that pencil. Then you dampened the jelly substance, smooth that paper out on top of it, give it some time, pick it up, and you might do, if you were fortunate, maybe 3 or 4 copies off of the same one. So you didn't do very many copies. You know. Most of the work was blackboard. But if I was going to give a test, I made the copies.
And for 20 children?
No, you didn't make them all. You know, you mostly 7th or 8th grade, 5th grade up.
5th grade up.
And you might do a worksheet, but it would be a test of addition, subtraction for the younger ones. So.
And then you had to sweep up before you left for the day.
Right. And we had this compound, this pinkish compound that you sprinkled on the floor, which took care of the dust. So you took care of that. I might say that at 88, they had an oil stove. So, you know, keeping it warm was not any problem. But when I went to Greenwood, they had a wood stove. And I had never built a fire. I'd watched them build, but I'd never built one. And I could not keep one going, let alone build it. So they hired a neighbor lady, lived just across the road. And she would come every morning and build a fire for me. And then an older boy, whose name was Jerry Bertaldi, still love that kid, would be there and keep the fire going all day.
Now, did the school district pay for that woman to come over? And
I'm sure they did.
Okay.
They did.
Because I have talked to teachers who've said they had to pay for somebody to come in.
I didn't have to pay.
It would have been a little earlier than your time. But, yeah. Oh, my. Well, anything else, or this has been a wonderful interview. I've enjoyed hearing
You've made it
your
so
story.
easy.
Oh.
I don't know if there's anything else that I haven't covered. I'll leave a copy of this if you want it.
Fine. Yes, I'd love to have a copy of it.
I'm thinking my first paycheck was $200, but that might have been at Greenwood. It might have been $150 at 88. I just don't recall for sure.
That's the other thing I didn't ask you. Thank you very much for remembering that.
But that's a far cry from what we received. Now, I don't know what the teachers get now, and I don't really remember what I was getting when I was quit, but I know it was a lot more than I did.
Yeah.
If you would like to keep this one, I just ran off because it just showed where we were raising money.
Yes.
This is another one of Greenwood, but not when I was teaching. There's several here of Greenwood.
Oh, these should all go in the
Well, that's
in the
what I
files.
thought.
Yeah.
I started to bring the originals. I know I'm
Classes.
going to copy them. This is the first teacher.
The
in
first teacher.
1914.
Oh, my.
And they had their own little yell, and it's printed on the chalkboard, but a friend had printed it off on the back.
How nice. How nice.
These are all the teachers at Oak Hill.
Oh. And the years they were there.
And this is a history of it. This one was the guy who became my husband.
Oh,
And
I
where
see.
am I in there? Right there.
Right there you are. Very nice. Well, these will be a great addition to the files and knowing
And
about
that's
that.
just a copy of a reading certificate. Like I said, we had a really good library.
Mm-hmm.
We had to read a certain number of books, and it was usually a competition who could read the most,
Mm-hmm.
Especially.
And someone
uh,
did that. There's Annetta.
copy of read cards, and this is,
Oh, how good.
and I think, as I said before, our school had been blown away in we called it cyclone,
Mm-hmm.
tornado. At the same time, our house, just down the holler when I was 3 months old, was blown away. So
Oh,
eventually they built a cellar.
I see. A one-room schoolhouse that had a storm shelter?
Right.
Great.
I don't know what this was off the back of, one of the pictures, I think.
Vera Bass, teacher. Well, I should probably turn this recording off while we're doing
Okay.
this, but thank you very much for doing it. It's been a wonderful interview.